I remember meeting with this client on Social Security planning, and something he said always stuck with me, which was, Andrew, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And frankly, that's my money and I would like it. Hey everyone, I'm Andrew. I'm the owner of Lever Wealth Management, which is the financial advisor for people who scare financial advisors. I'm also a CFA charter holder and a CFP professional who spent the last several years helping ultra high net worth and high net worth clients take their complex lives and simplify it so that they can make decisions. And what I do now is I take those learnings and I give them to you so you can apply them to your own life. And today I want to talk about Social Security planning. I do have another video where I talk about a framework, but just the idea of a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And I've seen this interesting truth of so many of the clients that I've worked with, which is whether you are 62 and you have $1 million, or you're 62 and you have $10 million, many people would prefer to take Social Security now rather than get the 8% per annum bump and wait till age 70. I do think it's worth bringing up if I've seen so many people over the years prefer to take it early. And so the biggest input is, when are you going to die? If I know when you're going to die, I can actually tell you the right answer. However, we don't know that. And so it takes a little bit of understanding your genetics, your family history, your own health, and saying, on an actuarial basis, what is my life expectancy? And if you're married, what's the life expectancy of you and your spouse together? Not necessarily a fun thing to think about or talk through, but it is a key input for the decision-making process. And usually the break even is rough and tough, around 18 years for Social Security. So if you take it at 62 and you die at 70, or you think you'll die at 70, well, the decision becomes very easy then. The second largest input that I would say is, what is your spending rate relative to your asset base? If you have $1 million and you're spending $50,000 a year, versus $100,000 a year, those give very different outputs because one is far more aggressive. And when you're aggressive, right, if you're spending 10% a year of your net worth, you have to take more equity risk. That in turn increases your sequence of returns risk. And I'm going to break that down a second. What do I mean by that? If you are spending a higher level of your assets, you need the expected return of your portfolio to be higher, right? The problem is when you increase expected return, you also typically increase risk, which is volatility of outcomes. If you have a higher volatility of outcomes, well, that means your first 3 years of retirement, if it's 2000, 2001, 2002, you lost a significant amount of your net worth in a 3-year period. You can have the same average annual return over 50 years for a 30-year retirement, but if your losses are compacted into this tiny window at the beginning of retirement, it does have an outsized impact on your portfolio. Whereas on the other hand, if you're only spending $50,000 a year and you have Social Security on top of that, so your withdrawal rate eventually goes down to a lower amount, what happens is you have the ability to take less risk in your portfolio. What's my point with this? Well, if you have the ability to take less risk, then you have the ability to essentially buy your pension earlier and forego the expected higher returns. And so, it's not as big a deal to take Social Security early if you have a lower spending rate. You can flip-flop this, though, and you could say, well, if I have a lower spending rate, I could also accept lower returns on my investments and defer Social Security. That is true. What I will say is, in practice, many times I've seen people prefer to take the Social Security first rather than insulate the investment portfolio. The third issue that you have to contend with is, if you have a spouse, you have to look at their longevity. Because if I take my Social Security at age 62 and my spouse takes theirs at full retirement age, but they have a much lower benefit, or they're only taking a spousal benefit, the problem is when I die, they don't get both. The government's not going to let you do that. The government says you can keep the higher of the two. Well, if you've locked in the first and the higher benefit at a lower rate, there is an issue that you need to work through with your retirement planning software of, am I going to unfairly be penalizing my spouse on the back end by taking Social Security early? And it's not necessarily right or wrong, but I have seen a few situations where people were taking in $5,000 a month from Social Security, and then it goes down to $3,000, and they're thinking, oh my goodness, I was just very happy with what I was taking in, but now I have this gap and I have to make it up with my investments, and that concerns me. Gives me a little anxiety. You need to do the math to see and make sure you're not making your widow or widower penalized for a decision today. And along with that, I would say the corollary is deferring your benefit. 8% risk-free is very hard to obtain elsewhere, right? B, when you review Social Security planning, you can't look at it in a vacuum. You have to zoom out and say, what's the retirement planning overall? And if you have $1 million, and let's assume that $1 million mostly in an IRA, you can do things like laddered Roth conversions for years. And at a very low effective tax rate, move significant assets from pre-tax to Roth. The problem is, if you're already taking Social Security, you've increased your AGI, and now you've increased the taxability of your Social Security. Whereas if you flip it and you give yourself time and space by deferring your benefit, you can get so many assets over to the tax-free bucket that by the time, possibly not guaranteed, but by the time you end up taking your Social Security benefit, you've now gotten it to where it's not taxable at all. It's something the government looks at called provisional income, and it's tiered. At its lowest, none of your benefits taxed on the federal level, and at its highest, 85% of your benefit is taxed. Not an 85% tax rate, but 85% of your benefit total being taxed. Also understand, if you retire, and let's say you may want to do consulting work, well, if you take your Social Security benefit before 62, before 65, you're going to get penalized for your benefit by working and getting an earned income. And so you need to take that into the equation as well. And the last thing I'll bring up here, I think it bears mentioning, because this is also personal at the end of the day, is it also depends. What is your philosophy on the government having your money? Because if your philosophy is, a little bit like those commercials back in the day, it's my money and I need it now, well, maybe you should consider taking it early. All else equal, right? I'm talking the philosophy here, not the math. And I would say most people that I've practically had discussions with over the years have fallen more into that camp. The risk you run if you take it early and you have a lower net worth is, am I going to penalize my spouse and it has an outsized impact on our retirement? Am I going to have enough assets at the end of the day to cover me out to a ripe old age of 95? On the higher end of the net worth spectrum, I have seen clients and recommended clients take Social Security early just because they want to lock in their benefit before any means testing occurs. It's not guaranteed that would happen, but if it were to happen, it would be to somebody who has an extremely high income and net worth. My encouragement with all of this is understand the pros and cons of taking it early. And the reason I'm not giving you something prescriptive here is because it truly is so personalized. But what you can do is, again, run through that pro and con list, run through that situation, and understand where you tick those boxes. Because if you tick the boxes of, I don't take a very high income, I don't have to take a lot of risk in my portfolio, I want the money, well, you can lean towards the air of conservatism. Whereas if you're on the other side, you're taking high withdrawals, you have longevity, you may want to do something along the lines of Roth conversions, lower your IRMA. There's all these factors. And it comes back to the judgment and the understanding of your personal situation to say, you know what, this makes sense. This doesn't. And being able to, in 5 or 10 years, you look back at the decision, not have regret. So until next time, see you all. Have a good day.